Hey, Sandra, how's it going?
Hi, John. How are you?
Good. So great to see you.
Great to see you.
So first off, I was hoping you could tell us a little about yourself. I mean, I know you, and I think you're fabulous. But for those who don't know you out there,
Sure. Well, my name, that might be helpful, Sandra Ro. I've had a number of different interests and activities throughout my career, but let's just say that I am a former nerd, financial engineer in banking that got into technology, and now I spend a lot of my time on how emerging tech can help solve some of our more fundamental societal problems, which for me, the passion is around financial inclusion and how do we put more money and resources into the pockets of those that really don't have a lot of power and voice right now.
yeah, I think now more than ever is the time, right? I mean, income inequality is at the highest levels.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Jobless claims, and it's you and I guess this was, 2 or 3 years ago, had a long conversation at Soho House about the fourth turning and just generally macroeconomic environment and how income inequality and these factors are really quite scary. How do we
I wish some of the things that we discussed 2-3 years ago were not true and were not happening, but they are, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes maybe society needs to hit rock bottom to make the changes that they need to make. But I'm super bullish and excited for what could come out of this, which is a better society built with institutions and kind of a renewed focus on community. I think there's been a time where I feel like, especially in the US, and I lived in England for over a decade and came back. It was actually I went through culture shock, and I'm American. Just thinking about how much the US is focused around the consumerism and the sort of acceleration of everything in life. And I feel like in some ways, the pandemic, plus all the social strife that we're going through right now and the injustices are forcing us to take a step back. Let's face it, we've all had to kind of huddle up in our little corners of the world, wherever we are. And it may force us to slow down, I think, a bit and think about what's going on here.
Yeah. And even in some positive ways as well, reconnect us with nature. I'm finding that a lot of my friends now are becoming interested in camping and getting out there. But getting back to your point, initially you said that it's like we've hit rock bottom. It's an analogy I use quite often with friends. It's like we are kind of like a drug addict that needs to purge this from our system and hit rock bottom before we can collectively, as a culture, as a society, restart and hit the reset button. And what that reset looks like is up to us to discover and to help each other and to support what the future is going to look like. The principle of the fourth turning, as we know, is like fourth turning is like the fourth season. It's winter, and in winter there's a lot of decay and there's a lot of change, and old systems are destroyed and then new systems emerge. And we need to figure out what those systems look like and how they could provide equity for, in an environment where there's a lot of inequities.
I cannot agree with you more. And I think with the pandemic going on, I think we actually have an acceleration of digitization that will happen, which means all the stuff that we were working on, and I spend a lot of my time in the blockchain and crypto space. A lot of the things that we've been talking about, the decentralized nature of creating systems where you have better governance, where you have more transparency, where you have trust building, all of these systems, if we're able to actually implement them in real society, they actually have a way. And look, the average person does not need to know what the hell a blockchain is. I mean, for heaven's sake, do you know how your mobile phone works? I don't, but yet it runs, right? And it's my lifeline, effectively, in many ways. As long as we were able to create systems that can help build trust and create transparency, whether it runs on a blockchain or not, I think that's what we need to be striving for. And how do we create as a community better systems? And I feel like this is the time. The next decade, I think, is going to be the most exciting and potentially the most paradigm shifting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's of critical importance.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a bit more about where you see the future of technology going, and what you perceive as a timeline for that?
Yeah. So I find I go through a lot of cognitive dissonance in my life, just because I feel like there's one set of people I know who are incredibly digital, and they're effectively global nomads, or at least they were up until recently. Travel the world, they don't see borders, they're highly intelligent, well connected, have friends all over the world, and everything is either through a phone or a laptop, right? And all these communications can happen, and the world is basically in the palm of your hand. And then on the other side, I spend a lot of time with people who have no access or very little access to the internet and live their lives. And I'm talking about the farmers I work with in some of my projects in sub-Saharan Africa and other places. And it's a very different life. And they're working with their dumb phones. Like they still have the Nokia phones from like, back in, I'm not even sure, like 2000s maybe. But that's evolving rapidly as well. So as more and more people get the smartphones, they'll be connected in a way that they never could before. But the fact that we have this digital divide, even in the US, is a problem. And a group of people need to work on how do we lay out basic infrastructure so that we can have a digital society, because it's going in that direction. But if we don't bring everyone along and we don't create a base that's equal access, we're gonna have a real, like, we think we have bad socioeconomic differences right now. I can't even imagine what the world would look like when we have a truly digital economy and we've got an entire group of people who are left out.
But historically speaking, it seems like whenever we have these new technologies, we always kind of stay, I don't know the expression, it's like if you took the wealthiest people in the world and you dispersed all the money around everybody, amongst everybody, within a certain period of time, it would all end up back in those wealthy hands again. How do we do this? How do we succeed in creating, some sort of resemblance of equality in an environment where, inequity is there?
I'll be the first to tell you, I don't ever believe in a world where we all have the same amount of resources and wealth. It's just not. That's not reality.
Yeah, right? And I don't think it is.
But I think there is a world where you at least are not predetermined by where you happen to be born. That's completely not your choice. It's not your choice. It's out of your hands, right? Where you're born, what zip code you're born in. I think what we need is to figure out how do we equalize the opportunity set, and so that there is mobility across one way or the other. When I think about societies like Denmark, Norway, Sweden, you're very familiar with Iceland. I think we could borrow a chapter or two from their book, because they don't have as many uber rich like we do, but they don't also have the absolute poverty and I'm talking about the US in particular, that we do. I don't think you need the extremes. I think, is there a way for us to bring back to a more abundance in the middle, and then obviously you still have very wealthy and you still have some poor, and how do you create systems to do that?
Well, it's funny, in Iceland there are no homeless, and I can't speak for Norway or Sweden or Denmark, right. But it's amazing. And how do you see cryptocurrencies and the blockchain playing a role? Because it seems that now, I just read in Bloomberg this morning that I think it's 37% of institutions are now invested in cryptocurrencies in the US and in Europe. That's a Fidelity report that came out this morning.
Yeah, so I think more and more people are, and institutions are looking for alpha, as they call it. And so they're looking at alternative asset classes. I don't think it's just crypto. I think it's going to be across the board. Is there anything I can invest in that's going to give me better than, negative yield of negative 0.5%?
Yes.
So it's a pretty low bar to cross. Having said that, having been in crypto as long as I have, and certainly you have, I think crypto offers an alternative payment system, an alternative transfer of value. So if you think about data as value or even money, a world where you can move that around just as easily and cheaply as you move around email, like that's mind-blowing stuff. And that's what crypto really is promising and promises, is how can you move value around in a frictionless way? Because let's face it, if you were sitting in, I'm going to pick a random country, Thailand, and I had to wire you money, how difficult would that be? It would be a process. I would have to make sure that I found someone who could wire you that money. It would probably cost me money on my end, the FX rate, money on your end in order for you to collect it. And it would probably take 5 days if we were lucky, right? And don't get me wrong, there are companies that are working on making it more efficient. But if you used Bitcoin or another crypto rail, I could probably send it to you within minutes with minimal cost. And I think that's the first use case. It's a very strong use case. I think it's a problem that needs to be solved. A lot of immigrants in the U.S., send money back to their families in various countries. And the U.S., for example, the U.S.-Philippine peso corridor is the fourth largest corridor in terms of volume. I forget how many billions it is per year, but there are billions coming out of the U.S. going into places like the Philippines. And if you have a 10% effective transfer rate, 10% for somebody sending $100, $10 is a lot to be taking out that could be going to someone's family. So to me, when you think about cryptocurrencies, it's attractive as an investment, alternative investment vehicle, because it is different than other things that are out there, but also what it can do based on whatever crypto it is can be some really interesting use cases. And I think that's where the real magic sauce is understanding that different cryptos solve different problems.
And one of the biggest problems right now is trust. And right now, we are at record levels of lack of trust in our governments, in our institutions, in our banks, in our, name it. And I think that our hope is that cryptocurrency can problem solve there, where, I feel like the young generation trusts crypto now more than they do any fiat currency. And it's exciting. But it's also still the Wild West. How do you see us adopting this in our, do you see, for example, an app like Coinbase being the front runner, or do you see a disruptor come along that's going to make it even easier for someone to onboard and to use the technology?
Well, first of all, I think we have a long way to go. I liken, it's kind of a poor analogy, but I say, if you think of the US dollar as an elephant, crypto is a fly on the elephant's derriere.
Yeah.
We're not there yet. $6.6 trillion goes through the foreign exchange markets every day. And I come from the foreign exchange world, so I spend a lot of time looking at stats. And when you think about $6.6 trillion goes through the system every single day, the pipes work, but the pipes are costly and they don't are not as efficient as they could be. So when I think about crypto, and again, I'm going to allude back to the payments problem and use case, crypto offers a very compelling alternative for certain societies and certain places. So where you don't have infrastructure, where it's incredibly costly, it's attractive. Why not adopt it and leapfrog? And this is also the difference between the developed world and what people call the developing or frontier world. I think places that don't have infrastructure, they should be absolutely grabbing onto the latest technology and building out infrastructure that's cheaper, faster, better, why wouldn't you? The problem in the US that we have is we have too many entrenched interests. And
Yeah.
let's face it, if you're one of the incumbents, how easily are you going to let go and be like, yeah, sure, somebody else come in and take my, entire power base or control? It's not going to happen. It's going to take a long time for that to happen. But I still think I'm still bullish in the U.S. I think there's a lot of change to come, and even the banks have come around the last 5 years. I mean, I worked at a big market infrastructure derivatives exchange, and you couldn't even utter certain words. But now, there's a Bitcoin futures, and there's, the likes of a Fidelity and JP Morgan and all these other brand names going into the space. So yes, the opportunity is big on the investment side, but I think on the use case side, where you're talking about helping those who have really friction-filled experiences. And by the way, as a small business owner, I have a couple startups. I will tell you, the fees I pay for wire transfers abroad, because we're constantly moving money around, is shocking. I had no idea until I started doing it how much it costs to wire money, send money around, and when there are problems, it's actually paralyzing.
Yeah.
Yeah. We need
So,
better systems.
so you made me think a bit about, like I said, our conversation we had a couple years back at Soho, and it's where do you see the macroeconomic evolution? Like right now, we have so many different things happening at the same time. I mean, you couldn't even make this up. Like if we told somebody, if we went back in time and told somebody in the early 2000s, 2001,
Yeah.
and let's say you went back in time and you told yourself, Donald Trump was president, like we just printed, I don't know how many trillions of dollars again after doing it before and bailing out, and you go through everything that's happening. And how do you see this playing out? I mean, flooding money into the system the way that we are now.
Yeah.
I mean, my first thought is, short-term sort of deflationary environment and then moving towards inflation, even here in the US, which is kind of crazy to think about. But where do you see us going?
Well, if you don't mind me reminiscing a little bit, I thought, and excuse my language, I thought shit hit the fan when we had the financial crisis in '08 and '09. And I was sitting in London at Morgan Stanley going through that entire horrific mess of the financial system almost collapsing. And I thought that was the worst. But now, today, fast forward another decade, and we're sitting here, I'm still, my mind is still trying to get over the fact that we have a global pandemic, which then turned into an economic crisis. And then on top of that, in the US, we have all of the cracks that we had before, let's face it, with racism and societal bias going on. It's all coming to a head, and you have to wonder, like, what the hell? Did any model predict this? I don't think so.
I almost kind of equate it to like you have an old barn behind your house and you have, just really dry hay and then there's some old wood in there. And then you have your old canisters of gasoline that are sitting there that are spilled over and some kerosene cans. And then all of a sudden it takes a George Floyd and boom,
it's just, yeah.
And I think that this is just, George Floyd, I think is just, this happens all the time. It's just now it's being filmed.
Yeah.
So you stack income inequality, the fact that let's say you're working at your Walmart making what's $6, $7 an hour, and your apartment, your rent's going up. You can't afford to hang on, and then you take their job away. And then we have to be empathetic and understand that like these people. I think that there was a study that came out of New York or something like that over 50% of the population doesn't have $1,000 in their bank account for an emergency. Like,
right.
And then you put a George Floyd and then on top of that police brutality. And it's just, it's just like there's so much dry tinder there that is just ready to go up in flames. And one of the reasons why we're doing these talks right now and what we're looking to do is say like, okay, let's understand what's happening right now. Let's understand how we can prepare ourselves for it. And then let's understand and try to think about and explore how we could help people not just navigate through this, but how do we create and work together to create solutions for the future?
So you asked a lot. I mean, you made a lot of important comments there. Let me start with a couple of things. When I think about the generation, this generation, and then the younger generations, we need to have a power transfer happening. Think about who's in government. Let's start with that.
Old
Let's
people.
talk about who's in government. And I have all the respect for the older generations, but they don't actually understand how much has changed. A lot of them don't. And I speak to a lot of them all the time in Congress and in different parts of government. They really don't understand how much the world has changed from a technology standpoint, and and every company has now effectively got to have a technology strategy if they don't already. Um, our world is rapidly changing. Our world has actually, when you think about the youngest generations to the oldest, there have been massive leap forward on the technology side, and we've got too many people who don't get it. Do you know we have one scientist, Bill Foster, who is a representative out of Illinois? We have one scientist in Congress. Like literally, we have so few technologists, scientists. So step number one, not only do we need to vote the way we want, which is to back digitally minded and technology focused, and whatever other your causes are, you need to back those people. But number two, we got to get more of all of us who really hate politics into seats of power.
Yes.
I actually think there needs to be a strategic, and I'm not calling it a pack, but I definitely think we need to figure out from a community standpoint who has the ability to go in and where we need people in there, and strategically actually start putting people in. Because on the power-based side, we need people to legislate accordingly. And then on the business side, the people who are building the Coinbases of the world and the next multi-billion-dollar companies out there, we need to make sure that they also have are part of a community like ours, where they can use those financial resources to help, right? Because we need all of those components. And then we need a bunch of people who are just really focused on nonprofit work, or the arts or education, or whatever other fields that they're interested in. We need that.
I think that we absolutely need people who are scientists, and even some doctors, and even artists, people who think creatively, because we need, when I see how this legislation is done and I see how policies are made, I think to myself, I'm like, well, what if we just change it into this or that? But people don't really think outside of the box because they're so regimented and stuck in an old way of doing things.
Yeah.
We almost need to, a friend of mine wrote a book, it's called The Click Moment, Franz Johansson. But his thesis of the book was that when you have to have a creative environment, what breeds creativity is diversity. And so you have to have people from very diverse backgrounds and very diverse areas of study come together and start exploring problems. And that's when you get really unique solutions. But when you get just a bunch of politicians together who all have their lobbyists with their little fingers in the honey jar, all you get is just...
Yeah. And the sad part is, if you think about it, most people I know who are in, the technology space, the idea of even going.
Hey, Sandra, welcome back. How are you?
Great to be back.
Sorry we got cut off before, but wanted to continue our conversation.
I'm glad we managed to sort the technical difficulties. I have to say, computers are great until they, stop working.
Exactly. So where do we leave off?
I think we were talking about how the community gets to a place where we can affect the change that we need. And I think we were talking a lot about we need people in positions of power. We actually need a power transfer in the US, right? And probably a lot of places in the world where a lot of the legislation and regulation and let's face it, power base is controlled by a much older generation that really most of them are quite out of touch with the digital age.
Yeah. So it's interesting to me because as I've gone through my life, I have a background. My family's been in politics for a while, and
oh, have they? Oops, sorry if I said anything negative. Oops.
Yeah, but it was a different time period, and the people that I knew and grew up with, the politicians, they were statesmen. They were known as the people that were the best of us. And I feel like that's devolved a little bit. And, my mom used to tell me growing up, like, you would never want to run for office unless you don't have skeletons in the closet, or unless you have a clean past, you've lived your life, you've lived Christ-like, or however she would say it, and that you,
right.
It's almost like those positions were held to such a high standard.
Right.
And people have lost trust in those politicians because, you've had lobby. It's like the little devil on the shoulders come in, and all of a sudden you're kicking people out of neighborhoods and gentrification and, not wanting to increase minimum wages. And you're seeing a siphoning of wealth into smaller and smaller groups of people, and the middle class is now shrinking, and now we're having a lot of divisiveness that's happening. So politics, for me, from my perspective growing up in it, I think that I've just lost a lot of respect for this system, for the political system, because it's not working well for people anymore.
I think a lot of people share your sentiment and your dismay. And I think that's actually why, as much as it loads a lot of people to think about it, I think that is exactly why more younger people need to go into office and actually try to change the course of that. Because it's a numbers game, right? If there are enough people who are in the camp of looking for the diversity, focusing on digital, wanting to help society to reduce the social inequities, like want to change the rules of the game so that it's not so biased to one small tiny sliver of society. The only way we can change that is within the structure. Because if you're saying, I actually don't want to change it within the structure, then you're saying you want to get rid of the entire thing that is what is government. And that's a very different tack to take.
Yeah, it's like almost anarchist or something like that. Well,
it's pretty revolutionary, yeah.
I kind of, when I look at what's happening now from kind of a spiritual perspective, so to speak,
right?
I feel like I've always felt that everything happens for a reason, right? That everyone has a purpose in this world. And even Trump, for example, and I feel like Trump's purpose is to like tear down the system, is to just destroy and dismantle everything that, there are a lot of systems out there that just aren't working efficiently enough. Maybe it's some sustainable organization we were funding before that just wasn't working very efficiently. But no matter what, it's like a forest fire. Trump is like a forest fire that just destroys the forest. It doesn't matter what, this tree is better or this tree is worse. Like, it doesn't matter. Everything gets destroyed in the forest fire. And then from this fire, we rebuild. We create the foundation of our new society. And that's what I feel like we're all trying to do is, from your perspective, the Global Blockchain Business Council, it's like you have to create this new, railway, this new like digital highway for the infrastructure of the future. Yep. Are we there yet? Are we using cryptocurrency yet? No, we're not. And a lot of people are speculating on it. But we all see that it's that railway for the future. And I think that's why there's so much excitement around it.
No, and look, let's expand this out beyond the U.S. to the rest of the world. And, what really concerns me about the U.S. at the moment, sitting here in New York, is that, and talking to some of the, politicians and government people in DC, I think there's an understanding that in Asia, there's a lot of innovation going on. But what I think Europe and the US is kind of missing the point of is they are accelerating at such a quick rate of development that digital superhighway that you just talked about that we all need may actually be created by those outside of the US, probably China, and it may dictate the standards that everyone else is going to adopt because they're already there. And that is what's concerning to me, is that we need almost a UN-like effort to work together to create a common digital infrastructure. But I think what's going to end up happening is China's going to come out with theirs. And if a whole mess of countries adopt their version, where does America fit in? Like, we're certainly not going to adopt it.
Our seat at the table is really, I think there's a little bit of dust on it at the moment.
Well, let's face it, the last 4 years, we've vacated it. We've basically said, screw everyone else. We're only going to look inward, which I get at a certain degree. I understand that completely. And I understand where people are coming from, but that doesn't mean you completely abdicate your role in the rest of the world. And I think that's effectively what we've done. And that's troubling to me. So we need to change course on that. Well, otherwise, other people are going to dictate what goes on in the digital economy.
Does the idea of Thucydides' trap concern you very much? Because so the idea of Thucydides' trap is that I think it's 15 or 16 times in history where you've had a global dominant world power, and then you've had a very quickly rising power. And whenever you've had that situation, I think it's been 15, 16 times in history, something around there. I think only 3 times did it not end in conflict.
Right.
So how do you navigate where you have China's far-thinking mindsets where they're not thinking this term, they're thinking 20, 50, 100 years from now.
Right.
They're creating systems and infrastructure to connect to the rest of the world while we're becoming isolationist, populist. How do you see that those two countries coming together? Is that a peaceful allowing of China to become the global dominant power? Or does the U.S. Military complex get in the way of that?
Yeah, no, I know it might sound a bit crazy, but this is just my view on how this could possibly work. Is actually we have to involve others. So meaning, what does that mean? It means we need more blocks of power. So meaning you've got the EU. I really hope the European Union remains because they've got their own problems, right? I think we need the ASEAN bloc, which is kind of like India coalescing with a bunch of countries around it to be an economic powerhouse too, because India is rising, right? And then you've got South America, with Brazil being the predominant kind of leader, but they can coalesce a bunch of countries around them. We need more coalitions, because here's the problem. When the US starts talking out of line or China starts acting out of line, because we're going to have that, right? We need a buffer. And my view is that, you know, in every family where there's extremists on either side who may have a lot of conflict, you need that person who kind of steps in and says, you know, guys, hey, chill out. Let's take this down a couple notches. We need that in the form of country blocks. And I don't think it's like Brazil doing it alone or India doing it alone that's going to work. It's going to be a strong European Union. It's going to be a strong sub-Saharan African, union, as well as a counterweight in South America and probably Southeast Asia as well. We need that. And I firmly believe we've got to have these blocks to counterbalance the conflicts that are going to come. I'm not saying that's the silver bullet, but it certainly, I think, would help reduce the tensions because we're going to have them.
So the thing is, I've heard you say that, and you sounded a little bit like Ray Dalio when he was talking about this as well. It's like, well, what we need to do is we need to come together and, understand and, basically what you're saying is like, this is what we need to do. But if you look at this in terms of, let's say, trading, and trading, they have a phrase, they say, the trend is your friend, right? You don't want to be a bull in a bear market or a bear in a bull market, you know? And I agree with you that this is what would bring us together and help us get through this crisis and this time that we're going through. But the question is, do you see that as the trend? Do you see a trend towards unity and connectedness and people coming together and putting aside differences, or do we see a trend toward populism, nationalism, authoritarianism? Do we see a trend towards, winner take all mentality, trying to, whether it's in China, get the South China Sea, whether it's in the US, trying to bring all the manufacturing back? It's the me, me, me world, and Trump is a me, me, me president, right? He's kind of a perfect reflection of the narcissistic generation. I just have to ask, is that the trend? Is that trend towards, we're not talking about Obama here. We're talking about someone who's not a politician.
Look, I think the leadership will dictate where we end up. So we could have a world where it is America first, America only, and we don't give a hoot about anyone else. Fine. In that world, the US dollar right now, I think based on the BIS report from last year, the US dollar is 89% of every foreign exchange leg, which means the US dollar is the reserve currency without question, just hands down. That number is actually, that percentage has gone up in the last 3 years, not down, which means the dollar is getting stronger, not weaker, with respect to its ability to be a part of commerce around the world. That's a fact. But here's my problem. With the amount of debt, with the amount of just fiscal undiscipline, whatever the word is, counter word is, we are going to have a problem with the fact that our creditors, our largest creditors, come from the East, with whom we have fights, increasingly going to have fights. And so therefore, where do we end up in a world where we start losing the dollar, what the dollar allows us to do as reserve currency, get away with a lot of crap, let's face it. So in that world where the dollar becomes less and less prevalent, and also therefore gives us less and less options to do what we do, which is get away with a lot, right, as the reserve currency. In that world, if that's the case, we will only have tensions, not just with China, but with everyone else in the world. And as we lose our reserve currency status over time, it's going to get harder and harder, and that's where the conflict will come. To me, we need to focus on the fact that we have the reserve currency, and how do we make sure that we keep that. And right now, the direction we're going in, I'm not so sure that we will stay on top. There's only one direction, as I always tell people when you're number one. There's only one direction you can possibly go, and that's it. So how do you preserve that special status that you've got? Really, I think we need to think about the way the US dollar is going to go. And I think a lot of other policies are going to come out of that. Well, we're lucky that people still in very, very troubled parts of the world want US dollars. I don't think people understand how important that is. If you go to Ecuador or you go to name it Middle East country, the fact that people actually prefer or can be okay with receiving dollars, that is a privilege that we could lose overnight or over time. And I don't think we should take that lightly.
So how do you see a world in which we change from being the world reserve currency to, I don't want to say like Venezuela, right? That's extreme.
That's extreme.
But how do we navigate our debt situation in this new environment? And how does the US, while it's printing amounts of money that our brains can't even fathom? I think
it's kind of hard to fathom $6 trillion. I don't know.
I think they said that you could just wrap the whole globe in $100 bills or something like that. Like, just start, like that's how much money it is or something.
Yeah. It's like you're in debt $6 trillion plus plus. Really, I don't even know what that looks like. It's just, yeah. I mean, it's hard to put your.
Even now, people are saying, "Oh, because of Corona, we're going to not pay back China for the debt that we owe them." Like, you know, all.
Yeah, that's going to be fun conflict point.
A little one, a little
Yeah.
contention, but you know.
So,
I guess maybe the answer is buy Bitcoin, right? I don't know, but
well, so here's the thing. I think Bitcoin and crypto will rise in its own way. And like I said, it's like a fly on the elephant's derriere, and it needs to grow a lot more. There needs to be many more before it becomes relevant to the real world, which is dollar versus renminbi. My issue is that you're going to have a digital renminbi that's going to move super quick, super efficient on this digital highway, and we have nothing. We have zero right now in terms of planning, focus, strategy at the federal level. Where are we? Have you heard of a digital currency plan? I mean, there is the digital dollar project that's being proposed. Absolutely, it's a great first step. But where's the implementation of that? We're not even there. We're like still arguing about it. I think we've moved the goalposts. It's advanced discussion. But if a Libra becomes more prevalent, or the digital Chinese renminbi becomes more prevalent, where does that leave the digital dollar? That's my problem. It's the next generation of conflict and warfare will be digital, and it will be around the value moving around in the ether, and who controls that, or whose value is used the most.
Well, you do have a little bit of background in studying warfare, don't you?
Just a little bit, yeah. A long time ago, I was very, very deep into it.
Can you tell me a little bit about that background?
Being the odd kid that I was, I don't know why. I think it was the strategic side of things. I got into military history, like in a really big way, and I ended up studying biological and chemical weaponry in the 20th century, and just tried to, I wrote my thesis on this actually in university, about how if you really wanted to take out large groups of people, it's not, I mean, you really want conflict, it's not hand-to-hand combat. It's literally unleashing something like biological agents or chemical agents. So I spent a lot of time on what would induce a country to go to that next step, right? Because it's a big leap forward. But let's face it, history has shown that humanity has a way of escalating things.
And what did you find would bring a country to that point?
I think when you've got the right toxic mix of factors, a dictator-like person in power, probably a desperate country that doesn't have a lot of other options, and let's face it, I think generally a country with a Napoleon complex. I'm pointing right to North Korea as an example. You have the right ingredients, and you could end up in a very nasty situation. And let's face it, also, you need to be relatively strategically important to the bigger guys. Just because you've got some weapons doesn't mean, chemical weapons doesn't mean it's important if you're sitting in the middle of nowhere where no resources and no one cares. So I think we have some hot spots. We've had some hot spots for a while. I think we need to thank the diplomats that work tirelessly. I think they do more than people give credit for. Because let's face it, who's going to pat anyone on the back for peacetime? People always look at things when they go wrong.
And what does the world's peace look like when you slowly dissect those diplomatic positions and you're surrounding yourself with sycophants and incompetent people who just follow your every word? What does the diplomatic relationship between countries look like when the world's leading country? I'm not saying that's any country. I'm not saying any country in particular. I'm just throwing an idea.
Sure you are. But well, I think this is where you remember you mentioned trust.
Yes.
When groups of people have trust, even if there's a couple bad apples, even if the bad apple's sitting at the top, if you had some like underlying trust and relationship to begin with, that gives you some goodwill to be able to have the other side maybe dismiss the bad apple because that person or thing might not last, but you've had that relationship. But if you have none of that and it's just absolute distrust, I think that's where the real issue is. Like, you can make mistakes in a relationship, right? And countries make mistakes with each other. But if you've got a good baseline and there's trust, let's face it, the US has screwed the UK and vice versa. But yet there's still a friendship there. And let's think about how it began. A bunch of people from the UK decided that, screw you, we're going to create a new country, and then actually had war over it. And yet we're still friends many, many hundreds of years later. So I feel like what we've got today is what you're hearkening back to, which a lot of people in the blockchain space talk about, which is this inherent loss of trust. And this, how do you build that? Because a lot of good things will happen once you start building those trust bridges again. And my issue right now is just, it seems like we need a whole combination of things, not just technology, to start building the trust factor. Trust has been broken, and it's honest. The trend, you talk about trends, it's down, not up. So how do we reverse that trend?
And it's trust across so many mediums. I mean, remember when we were laughing at fake news ideas in 2015, 2016, around there, but now fake news is everywhere. I actually would love to hear your thoughts on a theory that I have, because,
Sure.
well, you have some of the background in this area, but if I were another country looking to harm the US, for example, my thinking would be that obviously you could not do it with kinetic warfare. There's not going to be boots on the ground. It's not that world anymore. What I would actually do is infiltrate chat groups, all these social media platforms, create these groups on all different sides and create polarizing articles and news articles, whether true or not true, and then incite violence, and then put these groups into the same place at the same time. And maybe even, like, for example, these riots, I have a theory that, all they have to do is maybe say, hey, I'll give you $1,000 in crypto if you go around breaking windows during these riots, during these protests. And then all of a sudden you can make a peaceful protest go violent. Because you even saw people telling people to stop doing that.
Yep.
And then there's just people just going around just breaking windows just for the sake of breaking windows. And it just makes you think, like, why, right? Like, this person didn't look like they were really angry, but then other people see them doing it. And then it starts becoming a snowball effect. And then all you have to do is say, okay, let's put these demonstrations together here and here. And then let's pay 5 people in each group to break stuff. And then we do that all around the country. And then we feed these articles in these different groups radicalizing. We put them in the same place at the same time. And I mean, that's what I would do if I was another country now. I mean, anyone who's thinking that we're going to be boots in the ground, kinetic warfare, that day and age is over. I don't know. What do you think?
I agree. And there are a lot of people saying that there's sabotage going on. So meaning the extreme sides are all sabotaging each other, saying, oh, it's that group that did it. Actually, no, it was that group that did it. And what is their common purpose? Their common purpose is to create division. And I guess for some of them, it is literally to bring down the country, or the government at least. And it's warfare. I think it's happening already. And frankly, we're lucky that there's been, even in New York, there was a bit of unrest, and it's largely calmed down over the last couple nights. But you're absolutely right. If you were to plant hundreds of these all over the US happening at the same time, and they all escalate, at some point, there is that tipping point where you overwhelm the authorities. And by the time the army comes in or whatever else we've got, it's pretty hard. You've got 30 million people who live here. It would turn into all-out civil war. And yeah, that could happen, but luckily, we didn't get there. I hope we don't get there. I really don't want to see the entire country go. But look, we have enemies abroad who are very happy watching what's going on right now.
Oh, they all are happy. All of our enemies abroad are happy that what's happening right now. And in fact, I think that if they truly are enemies, they would seize this opportunity to help continue the divisiveness. And look, I mean, the concerning thing is 3 months from now, when these unemployment checks stop flowing in, or after Trump's reelection, when he doesn't care about getting reelected again and does whatever he wants to do, and these people don't have unemployment checks coming in, what do things look like out there? And I don't want to be alarmist, and that's not who I am. I see myself as a very positive person, but we can't not think about these things if you're a rational, logical human being looking at what's happening.
Yeah.
Because it's actually the most logical thing from that of an adversary, right?
I think it's a numbers game. We have to have more people in our community who want peace over violence. And therefore, we have to have enough people who are willing to stop those who are being violent or want to incite the violence.
But what about cyber police? Because let's say you are another country and you're creating these groups and you're creating mini militias within the country and activating people based on emotions, especially right now, they don't have money, maybe even supporting them financially in some ways. Do we have a system in place to come into these groups and understand who's setting them up, where it's coming from? How do you police that? And should we be policing it? I mean, these are really hard questions.
It is. They are. They're very hard questions, and it's actually leading into a bit of I'm working on an op-ed right now, and it's leading into what I think is missing from the discussion around the police reform, is we have institutions that are so old and based on no technology or based on very little of the digital age. We need a complete rethink. When you think about how policing should work, it's no longer about bank robbers. It's around people attacking from a cyber point of view, and foreign elements and internally domestic bad elements. So the police of the future actually needs to be a bunch of software coders, hackers, and largely one unit that focuses on the digital world and the crime going on there versus the traditional police who obviously are on the ground walking through neighborhoods. I forget what the statistics are, but when the last time you heard of a bank robber going into a bank and robbing a bank? That used to be like criminals back in I don't know, the 1950s.
Now people are hacking wallets left and right.
But yet people are hacking wallets and they're doing SIM swapping. My phone got SIM swapped last year. Really? And I was in London. I was so pissed. I took 4 days for me to get control back of my phone. And then when I spoke to our dear beloved telco about what had happened, they actually lied to me and said that it happens on occasion. No, I got SIM swapped. It's an inside job. Someone actually has to take your SIM and transfer it to somebody else because they believe that you are the account holder. And in this case, there were insiders who were bought out. But here's the problem. You could go to the police and explain to them what happened. And trust me, there have been now lawsuits about it. Michael Turpin is known for having won several of these lawsuits because telcos won't do anything to protect the people. The police, the average police precinct, they will take it down, they will file a report, but they're not going to help you. They don't know what SIM swapping even is for the most part. And these are problems that are growing. I'll give you another one. I was with the American Bar Association, and these are what we call corporate honeypots. Think about law firms. Think about consulting groups. These companies hold an awesome amount of contracts, M&A deals. You want to go after corporate America? You don't necessarily have to go after the corporation. You go after their lawyers and law firms who, by the way, when you look at their cybersecurity and their ability to protect their information, You'll be sad to hear that last year, it was not well publicized, most likely, but a couple dozen law firms were taken down for an entire week by a bunch of hackers. And guess what they wanted? They wanted ransom in the form of Bitcoin. That was literally these law firms' first encounter with crypto, and it was them being shut down completely and their information being held hostage.
Wow.
And this is going to happen more and more.
So did somebody go into a AT&T store or whatever provider you had and say, "Hi, I'm Sandra, my phone got stolen or lost. I need a new phone," and then they just transferred the data over?
No, it was actually, there's a guy that's been arrested. He was 19 out of California who did some of the, so they targeted number one crypto, people in the crypto market. So people who are known in the crypto space, because nearly every crypto person I know who has been around for a while has been SIM swapped. Number two, it was these people paying off an AT&T customer service person to basically do this. Because what happens is instead of credit card companies where your PIN code or your, most of your digits are hidden, in telcos, your password is completely available to the customer service person as they're bringing up your information.
But so, can't they just hack into that system?
Well, no, they basically asked the person to provide the passcodes and then they went and changed it.
And I imagine as people are furloughed and as people get desperate, these types of things are going to get even worse, because people are going to be looking for extra. Now, did you get your crypto stolen, or were you okay?
I am very lucky because most of my stuff is offline in cold storage. They did get into one of my crypto exchange accounts, but I had actually moved most of my stuff off, so it was fine. But I did close out my account there because I could not believe how easily these people were able to get into my one of the crypto exchange accounts.
Well, that's when years ago, Bill Ty was in Iceland, and he was telling me about him getting SIM swapped, and that's why he carries a burner phone. And then ever since he told me that story, I got a burner phone immediately with my two-factor authentication. And I'll never forget that story. And he was also, they planned it when he was traveling as well. And because they have kind of a short window of time where they have to,
Yeah, it's much harder when you're abroad to go deal with your, telco in the US and shut stuff down and bring stuff over. I mean, it was actually an amazing vicious loop because I had tied my phone number was tied to like my Gmail. They got access to my Gmail account. They got access to my other email account. And I had looped the other two related to each other. So basically you just end up in this vicious cycle because now they've gotten control of everything. You can't actually get in. Long story short, it is on the rise. The police need a unit to be able to deal with more of this kind of crime. Because in the case of Michael Turpin, and there are articles about him, he lost $23 million. He was one of the earliest SIM swap victims, something like that. But there's been a number of lawsuits where he's actually won. So I think momentum is going back in his favor. But that's an awesome amount of money to lose because you've been your phone's been hijacked.
That's scary.
Yeah.
So I have to ask you, for those out there, and one of the reasons why we're doing this is so people like yourself can provide during this time where people are going through changes and they're a bit scared. What advice would you give someone right now who's, let's say, come out of school and they have student loan debt and now job market's uncertain? What are some little key things that you've learned along the way that you feel like would be little gems for those looking for gems in this world?
Sure, I'll try to keep it short. I think number one, you never know who you're going to meet through other people. So be very careful about judging people off the start just because of the way they look or the way they dress or the way they are. You never know who someone knows. And I think your networks and the people you build around you help you and partially determine your success as well. And I will have to say the people who have supported me, the people who I've reached out to, having a very diverse network of people especially if you're able to around the world, is a very good thing. And I think if you start building that as soon as you get out of school, not only leveraging your school mates, but also then beyond, just always be curious about learning about people, because you just never know when someone might lead you to another thing that you might really become passionate about. And I guess the other part is just be open-minded. I know it's a scary time, but this is also a good time to see where are the industries that look like they're on the rise. Where do you think you might be able to plant yourself in an industry that's on the rise for the next decade? Because there are definitely industries that are going to be growing. If you think about it, healthcare, especially healthcare meets technology. That, if you find a niche there that you're passionate about, you have a career for probably the rest of your life trying to solve these problems. Healthcare is going to be a huge one with the cross section of technology. Same thing with financial services and technology. That crossover is enormous, and we're still on that journey. And I've been in the space for decades, and I still see that journey evolving in a very fundamental way. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And look, I don't know about you, John, but when I first got out of school, I had no idea what the hell I wanted to do. And I just went to places and talked to people and just tried to figure out, okay, well, I want to contribute. I will contribute here for a certain period of time, and new opportunities come, right? And just be on the lookout so that you can evolve to your next opportunity. But I think trying to be as open-minded and work hard. I mean, my view is if you're going to commit to something, do it with heart and grit, because people will appreciate that, especially when times are tough.
Yeah. And do you currently have any projects that you want to shout out, or that you're working on, or any new things in the pipeline?
Yeah, we're working on, and this is going to be under my, I'm wearing my CEO role as the Global Blockchain Business Council hat. We are looking to help the blockchain industry and the crypto digital asset industry by working with a number of huge partners. We've made it public very recently. We've teamed up with Milken Institute and Accenture and the World Economic Forum, as well as MIT DCI, to create a global standards mapping initiative. It sounds kind of crazy, but the idea is a lot of people in the blockchain space, countries, institutions have created standards all over the place. Technical standards, legal and regulatory, as well as business consortia, business standards. We're going to bring all those puzzle pieces together, and then we're going to figure out where are the gaps and where are actually the commonality for us to help grow this industry into a multi-trillion-dollar one. Because standards do and have demonstrated they can pave the path for mass adoption. Think about ERC20 tokens. ERC20 is an Ethereum-based standard, and tons of tokens are built on top of that.
And
we need more of these sort of standardized, consensus-driven standards. Because right now we have a hodgepodge mess of them.
Yeah, 2,000, 3,000 now, is it?
Yeah.
It's getting crazy. So are there any that you're particularly bullish on, any of these cryptocurrencies besides the basic Ether and Bitcoin? And
I don't talk about for speculation. My view is, my guess is as good as anyone else's. My view is, if you really believe in a project, that's what you're investing in. So whether it's Filecoin and their ability to help us have a distributed cloud network or next generation data storage network, to me that's really interesting. I firmly believe, by the way, that Pied Piper, that Silicon Valley show, stole IPFS idea, Filecoin idea from Protocol Labs. So it's the other way around. I think they actually took it and made it Pied Piper. Those kind of concepts are really cool, because let's think about it. We're going to use more and more data than ever. And so what does that mean? We're going to be using data like a bunch of crazy monsters. So how are we going to store it? Where is it going to go? We need to figure out ways to do it very cheaply. Cloud is good, but there's always room for improvement. And my view is, projects like that, if they do execute well, that's what I want to be investing in, is looking at these projects. And That's what I'm looking at. Right now it's difficult though because there's so many rubbish ones.
Yeah, it's hard to sift through the rubbish.
I think so. I've got my dozen that I've held from like 2017, and frankly, I haven't bought into a single one since.
Just set it and forget it.
Huddle.
Huddle.
That's all it is right now for me. I'm just holding it. We'll see. I mean, I got into some of the stuff pretty early on, so we're talking like single dollars versus where they might be now. I try not to get too wrapped up to it. If you want to be a day trader in crypto, I totally get it. Then go be a day trader. But otherwise, it's just too much to try to manage all of the ups and downs.
Yeah.
Unless you're really serious about it, it's like almost a full-time job.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Sandra, for coming on today, and it's
thank you, John.
Pleasure to see you and have you on, and look forward to doing this again soon.
Well, let's hope we end up when we meet again, a world that is more like the way we'd like to see it. Right now, it's a bit.
That's what we're looking to build.
Thanks a lot.
Do it together. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.